Hi everyone, and welcome to Founders and Legends Day here on twitch.tv/D&D. I'm your host, Satine Phoenix, and I'm here with the founder of Founders and Legends Day, Luke Gygax, and Mike Merles, the creative director of, is there more to that? I feel like franchise creative director of Dungeons and Dragons.
Franchise is the word that gets the flourish.
Yes.
There's like a tilde in there somewhere. I am honored to be here and host this momentous occasion. And before I tell you what's about to happen today, because I'm so excited and I literally cannot sit still until we do this. We at D&D have a present for Luke Gygax. Even though yesterday was his dad's 80th birthday, the present is for you.
Awesome, thank you.
The presenting of the present.
All right. Ooh.
See how easy it was to remove from the pack?
Well, I'm excited.
I love giving presents. So what we have here is a Dungeons and Dragons ampersand branded wormwood box in Purple Heart.
Oh, this is really nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No problem, man.
Yeah, we love everything that you do. I know that Mike and I go to GaryCon every single year, and it happens to be like one of my favorite conventions in the whole world. But more than it just being a gaming convention, you and your family have brought together people from all over the world to create what feels like playing Dungeons and Dragons at the table into a convention setting, meaning, you know, you've got all these game designers that come out and fans of the games to come out and play together. And as somebody who's all over the place and does lots of shows, and I'm sure you get this experience, or you have this experience too, where you're just doing a lot of things and people seem to recognize you, GaryCon is a safe place for people like us. And I just want to thank you and everyone that works at GaryCon for all the wonderful things that you do.
No, thank you guys, and you guys are huge supporters, and I appreciate it. And I just want to put out a word to everyone out there that GaryCon badge sales are now open today, right now, as well. So if you want your badge for GaryCon, go to GaryCon.com and get your badges now before they sell out. Especially if you want one of the gold badges or above; those are going to go probably in minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm running a game there.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's about camaraderie, and that's how I grew up playing and socializing, was primarily around the gaming table. And so that's totally natural, and it's what I enjoyed. And so when my dad passed away, I thought, what better way to remember him than to get together and shake dice, swap stories, create new stories, and do what we do around the gaming table. So it's a fitting tribute, and I have a lot of help from my family, of course, and some really talented folks who are making sure that badge sales are going on right now.
Yeah.
So shout out to the GaryCon staff. Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about growing up inside of Dungeons and Dragons later, but I want you guys to know what you're getting yourselves into. This entire thing is a 12-hour adventure with a bunch of the people that make games and make supplements for games and create shows and products inspired by games. So what we have here is an hour of interviews and footage, pre-recorded footage by Todd Kenrick and his amazing eye. And then we have a 3-hour game, and the first one is an AD&D game by Stephane Portnoy from Dwarven Forge. And that's going to be really cool. It's a low-level game. And then we have another set of interviews after that 3-hour game, and that goes for an hour. Following that, I'm dungeon mastering. I'm dungeon mastering a Maze Arcana Eberron game, and that's 3 hours. And then the next hour is another set of interviews with a bunch of more people who are totally amazing. And then the last one is Mike Merle's dungeon mastering a level 18 game.
Oh yeah.
With a bunch of people who I think the minimum height is like 6'1" or something.
So below that. That's for players, not Dungeon Master.
The players.
The Dungeon Master is exactly at 6'0". So.
And then, and that will close out our 12-hour adventure here at Founders and Legends Day. And you guys, you don't have to just sit and watch. You can participate by donating. So today is the inaugural launch of Extra Life, raising funds for Extra Life. So if you want to donate to the children's hospitals, go to extra-life.org/team/D&D, and you can donate. I know that you have a page.
Yeah.
Maze Arcana has a page. I think most of us on the D&D team have a page. So yeah, go to there, donate to there. It's for a good cause, and we're basically doing that for the whole day.
Yeah.
Actually, we're doing that for a lot. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so with Extra Life this year, we're starting early. This is our inaugural event. This is kind of our kickoff. Thought it'd be a nice thing to go hand in hand with Founders Legends Day. You know, everyone celebrating the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. That felt like a good time for kickoff. So a lot of us have pages that are live now. On my page, if you go to the web address that Satine mentioned, you can also go to dnd.wizards.com/extralife, and that has information about our schedule. We're starting here at Founders and Legends. Then we're going to be at Gamehole Con in November in Madison, Wisconsin. That's where we're going to be wrapping up our sort of official events. But you can donate at any time throughout the year. We won't say no to money donated to help the Children's Miracle Network hospitals.
That's a great cause. Yeah.
And we're doing things.
Exactly.
You're making things.
I'm making things. So if you go to the D&D team page, you should be able to navigate and find my page. So I'm offering a few things right now. I'm going to add stuff as we go. We'll see like how ambitious I get. So to start with, if you want a custom-built subclass for your D&D 5th edition character, I'm building those. I've already offering 6. I've already had 1 go. So there's 5 left. I'm also going to build custom DM screens. So in my little DM kit, I have these little miniature DM screens I built, sort of handmade with stickers and stuff, and I'll get the D&D team to sign them. So that's up for one of the things I'm offering. And then I'll also, those are both pretty high-end things. Like I've kind of, like last year I had the subclass at $2,500.
Wow.
And they still all went. So I kept it there. So it's kind of like play the long game. Don't want to panic and drop prices. But it's for a good cause. And then for a few $100s, you can get one of the custom DM screens. And then for $50, I will sign a book plate and mail it to you if you want to slap it in one of your D&D books and make it officially signed by me. So we'll be adding things throughout the year. As bids come in for those, I'll backfill with a few other things. And at events, we'll also have additional things we'll be offering. And everyone, so basically one of the great things of Extra Life too is, if you're listening to that and thinking, well, I don't know if I can necessarily throw some money at that, you can also create your own page and create your own fundraising opportunity. And the great thing with Extra Life is you can link that to your local children's hospital. So I live up in Seattle, so that's the hospital I'm supporting, but you can pick your local one, you can pick anything where you grew up, whatever, so it's a really great way to get involved. And then if you create your own page and start fundraising, you can also join the D&D team and take part in our sort of greater overall fundraising. And it's tabletop games, video games. It's tons of fun. So we'll be streaming here, and then we have a Gamehole Con. We'll be streaming games, so you'll get a chance to see us there. I'm running a game there too. And are you running a Gamehole?
I think so.
Okay.
Maybe at least one, if not 2. We also have the official WotC Day, which is November 3rd.
Yeah, that's the official.
I think it's November 3rd.
Yeah, it's November 3rd. That's like the sort of official Extra Life Day. There were with an event like this, it's great to try to get everyone, like as many people taking part at once as possible. Yeah. So that's kind of like the highlight day of the year. But like I said, you can organize something next week. We're never going to say no to donations if they come in early or late. It's all good.
Yeah. And I know we're sitting here, we're talking about all the ways that you can participate if you want. We also have Founders and Legends Day shirts. So go to foundersandlegends.threadless.com. You can get some super cool shirts. I know he always makes really awesome GaryCon shirts. And that one's really cool. It says Game Master. You can't see it on the bottom. Oh, there you go. You can.
It's a Game Master. It's a special Game Master edition. But yeah.
I think I got one last year.
Well, you're a Game Master.
It's true. So you can participate by that. We also are opening up questions the end of this hour. So go ahead and put your question in the chat room, and we will have our moderators moderate them and then get them to us at the end of this hour. So go ahead and do that. I think it's like type in question in all caps and then ask your question, because I can imagine things are going a little crazy in the chat room. But thank you all for watching, and thank you all for being a part of this freaking amazing day. So that is what is going to happen. And we're going to start right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So you are the sun. of Gary Gygax.
I am.
You grew up with Dungeons and Dragons.
I did. Ever since I can remember, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons, and so is my family. You know, I'm the youngest of my father's children, with my mom, Mary, and then of course I have my younger brother Alex as well. But he's like 15 years younger than me. But I'm the baby amongst my immediate siblings, and so I was literally, gosh, I was 2 years old, I think, when my dad wrote Dungeons and Dragons, and I was 3 when it was published, the first year it was published. So my earliest memories are really around the gaming table, and probably trying him not keeping the dice away I don't swallow them, but as much as I remember, it was shaking dice and having a great time. And I still see that today on Facebook. Somebody had posted up on their kid playing with the dice, and he was rolling his dice, and he was going, yeah, pow, 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 and then and the guy was just watching. I was like, oh yeah, I totally did that too. So, and we're gonna do that later on today, pretty much, but just as in the grown-up style.
That's cool. Ivan Van Norman, I babysat his kid before, and that he runs around saying dice, dice, and just has bags, dice, dice. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna put the dice back. So growing up in that household, you got to basically grow up with the founders of Dungeons and Dragons.
I did. I saw a lot of those people, and although I was very young, and I may not have recognized it because that's just how I grew up. That was normal. I consider guys like Jim Ward, the guy who invented Metamorphosis Alpha. I've known him since I was just a little boy, so he calls me Little Lucas still. But he's like my uncle. Tom Wam, who's involved in Guidon games way back in the late '60s, early '70s, and made great SNITS games and draws all the cartoons and stuff. He's like an uncle to me. Tim Kask was there, the first editor. It's like those guys are sort of like my uncles, but they feel like family, and they all obviously come to Gary Con. They're my dad's friends and stuff. So those are the folks that I grew up around. Rob Kuntz was just a neighborhood kid. Skip Williams, a neighborhood kid with my dad. So these were the people who were just hanging out and gaming. And so that's, I didn't really recognize that. But since my father passed away 10 years ago, I got to a new appreciation for it. As I held Gary Con, I got to learn a lot more about the foundation of the game. Because as a boy, you maybe you haven't studied it, you don't realize those things that are going on. And it's really a wonderful story, and I think it should be told in some way, like this D&D documentary or whatever. One of these needs to, or I need to do it myself. We need to tell the story, because there's a beautiful story of the creation of Dungeons and Dragons, and also on the personal side of my family, my mom and dad, and all those things going that I think is really wonderful. But Founders Day for me, Founders and Legends Day, is just a way for me to talk to, and all of us to talk to, the folks who are out there who watch streams, and remind, just kind of give them a little bit of information on the foundation of the game and the roots and the history that's there, because we're seeing just a fantastic influx of new players and young players who, 1970s probably sounds like, it's like ancient history. It's, like, 1970s, that's a long time ago. But yes, it was written in 1973 and published in 1974 by my dad, Gary Gygax. And there's a lot of players that went into creating kind of the zeitgeist that was out there. So there was various really important ingredients. But what I've learned, or what I've seen, is that my dad was the guy who recognized that this was a revolutionary game. This style of play was revolutionary, and he put it all together, and then he went to pitch it to the big game companies at the time. Guidon Games, not very big, it was really run out of someone's house, but that was the big publishing, and Avalon Hill, which had done Gettysburg and some other war games, and that was like the big company at the time. Neither one of them were interested in that. So he had five children. He was working as a shoe repairman out of the basement of a house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, a small town, 330 Center Street. And he talked to my mom, and he said, hey, I think I can do this. Are you willing to support me? Are you willing to, for me to give it a shot at this gaming thing? And she said, well, I can tell that's your passion. Yeah, let's do it. And then, of course, she reminded him to keep going. She prodded him in the right direction. But we were very poor. We were on food stamps. My mom gardened and subsisted to take care of the family. So this was a huge undertaking. It was a huge risk. And my dad got his best friend, Don Kay, to take a loan against his life insurance policy in order to get the money to start Tactical Studies Rules, which is what TSR, that's where the letters TSR came from, was Tactical Studies Rules. And there's this great a story in there, and I encourage you, the story is told in a couple different books. Excuse my reach over here. But if you want a read about my dad, I would just encourage Empire of Imagination. It's a great book, and that's by Michael Whitwer. And I'll have to bring him to stream and talk about that. He comes to GaryCon. And then if you want to get into a PhD level delve into gaming and wargaming, and you want to be able to impress all your friends with lots of really cool facts, I suggest Playing at the World by John Peterson. Very, very knowledgeable guy, and he will dig deep into the smallest details and bring them to you. So highly encourage. Very thick book. This is very good. This book, awesome book. A little bit more readable, but packed with information as well. Like you can read this one, it's more of an easier read, and Playing at the World is more like a collegiate level. But if you read those books and you talk to people, you find out that there was kind of this zeitgeist building in the late 70s and late 60s and early 70s, and there was probably what I would trace back where I'd want to start talking is a game called Braunstein by Dave Wesley, who was in the Minnesota, Twin Cities area of Minnesota, and he was I think he was still a military officer. He might just have been retired, but basically he had the concept of he had the scenario, and he was the referee, and each person at the table played one role. They didn't have a unit. They weren't playing a military unit. They were playing one role, and it wasn't necessarily the commander of a unit or something. It might be somebody who's in the resistance, the mayor of the town, and there was this, French invasion coming, and so there was a bunch of intrigue going on. They all had different motivations, and they would communicate by pen and paper. They would just take an index card, and they would write on there what was going on, and then they'd give it to the referee, and he'd give it to the person, and so there was all these communiques going on, and you didn't know who exactly was talking to whom. I think that came out of play-by-mail gaming, probably that style, but that was your kind of a faster play-by-mail. You were all there in person, and you're doing this. It was complex, 10, 12 players. So that was kind of the idea of role-playing, I think, or what we call role-playing. But it was just somebody doing this, and they didn't know it was role-playing at that point in time. But I think that idea tied to a game, one character, that's very important. And Dave Wesley, that's something I learned. I wasn't aware that was came out from Dave, and I have a great appreciation for that. And I told him so, and I'd like to think people should know who Dave Wesley is. Well, my dad, about that time, saw Siege at Bodenberg, because my father loved wargaming, and he would stay up all night, writing little rules variants and typing up on a computer and printing them, on a mimeograph or whatever it was, and mailing them out to people. So that was his love, it was his passion, and he started a convention to bring wargamers together. And he was so stoked in '68 that he got 100 wargamers together. It was like a huge amount of people all together playing war games. And of course, we lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So what they were going to call it the Lake Geneva, War Game Convention. Well, if they abbreviated that, it's the Geneva Convention, Gen Con, which we have today, right? So Gen Con is next week. Right, so the timing of this is apropos, because yesterday would have been my father's 80th birthday, and he's clearly a very important person in the foundation of our industry and creation of Dungeons and Dragons. And then next week we have Gen Con, which is a vehicle that he created to bring gamers together so he'd get to play more war games.
Wow.
And then it has become this huge phenomena, and now 60,000+ people.
Almost 70,000 to think of from 100 people.
Yeah.
To be lucky to get 100 people, then to 70,000, taking over the entire city of Indianapolis.
Yeah. Yes. So I think Gen Con came about because my mom said, no more filling my living room with war gamers sleeping on the floor in sleeping bags and keep my kids up all night. So they had to find somewhere else to do it. So that's how Gen Con came about.
So we could say your mom founded Gen Con.
I think so.
She's actually the one to say.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
It's funny that like your dad's passion and then your family's passion is so charitable and giving and literally about bringing people together to work together.
Yes.
And that's different. I mean, we've had video games for a long time and other you have board games which are highly competitive.
Yes.
So
yeah, I mean, and that's where my dad started. Alexander, Yeah, it was one of the games that he did, and all sorts of variants. So I mean, he was a war game writer. That's what he did, and he fell in love with medieval miniatures through Siege at Bodenberg, which is another game. I think that was 1968 or 69. He saw that, and there was these really cool Elastilin miniatures, which I played with and broke a lot of. Yeah, so sorry, they were really cool, and just amazing. Lots of fun as a kid. Oh man, it was really amazing, and lots of fun for grown-ups too.
Yeah.
And my dad loved those miniatures in the Siege, so he got into that, and he was a member of the International Federation of Wargamers. And then he said, well, they're very much into historical wargaming. He's like, what about, no one's really paying attention to the medieval parts. They started the Castles and Crusades Society, and they focused more on medieval wargaming, which was not very popular, right? It was a little less known. And out of that, he wrote rules called Chainmail with a guy named Jeff Perrin, whose birthday was earlier this week as well. He's 71. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he is still alive. He comes to Gary Con.
Can I touch it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So in there is rules for not only unit combats, but man-to-man combat. So we're seeing the focus shrink down to a more individual level, and then there's the fantasy supplement, the fantasy supplement in there,
right here in the back,
where you could be a wizard who would throw spells, or a hero, and there's just some different rules in there. So it's the idea of fantasy coming in, one-to-one battles. So that's going on. That's in the mix, and so a guy named Dave Arneson, who lived in the Minneapolis area, and was a big war gamer as well, he saw the Bronsteins and he thought, wow, this is pretty neat. And then he saw medieval stuff going. He's like, maybe we could do a medieval Bronstein. And he would have people play themselves in a medieval setting, and then he would string the adventures together. So there was the concept. Now, he didn't have rules necessarily. I think he kept it all in his head. But that was kind of where he was tying together. Oh, you have brains. How smart are you? Brains. Or how healthy are you? And he had some categories, and they just write on a piece of paper. And not everyone had the same stats, but you might get a +1 from doing something that would carry to the next game. So this idea of carrying on and having one character came out of that. It was medieval Bronstein, which became Blackmore, which was his campaign setting, and he also. There was a castle stuff, but you get to go in the dungeon, go underground, and that was pretty important. Another key component of what would become Dungeons and Dragons, and of course, another very important Dave, who was in the Minnesota Twin Cities area. Yeah, the three Daves: Dave Wesley, Dave McGarry, and Dave Arneson. Well, Dave McGarry loved playing Blackmore, and he loved going down and adventuring, but he didn't want to be a referee. The word Dungeon Master didn't exist yet. He didn't want to referee a game. And Dave Arneson was too busy to be doing it as much as he wanted, so he's like, what can I do? Well, I know what I'll do. I'll make a game called Dungeon, which will have a board map of a dungeon, and you can play like an elf, a dwarf, a hero, or a wizard, and you go and there's tiny little cards.
Oh my goodness!
So there's little cards, and there's no way you can possibly see this, but yeah, there's little tiny cards that you would stick in the rooms, and there'd be a monster card and a treasure card.
You're the monster cards.
Yeah, and if you defeated the monster, then you got the treasure card, and the goal was to get so much treasure, and then get out of the dungeon without somebody ambushing you.
The
little pawns, and just 6-sided dice, because other kinds of dice weren't very popular. Although the idea of other than 6-sided dice was out there since Tractics, which was another game my dad did with Mike Reese, I believe, and but that was very historical, crunchy gaming. So we have Dungeon, which actually preceded the invention of Dungeons and Dragons, which I didn't know until I talked to Dave McGarry and he showed me all his letters and stuff. And of course, no one wanted to publish his game either. So, and it's a fantastic game. It was really, again, one of those revolutionary things. So, out of this, we have all these ingredients together, and my dad kind of pulling it together. And so he had to gamble everything because he thought this rule book, these 3 rule books at the time, 3-volume set, Men in Magic and everything, and there wasn't even a name for it. What did they call it? Rules for Fantastic Medieval War Games, Campaigns Playable with Pencil and Paper, with paper and pencil and miniature figures. So I think cool. D&D rolls off the tongue a little bit better than all that. But yeah, so from these 3 little books, it all started, and all those guys had a part. But I I certainly see it from what I've done and what I know. My dad just had the drive. He recognized that this was cool and this was different and this was going to change gaming. He thought it could sell 10,000 copies.
Oh, wow.
He thought it could sell 10,000 copies, which was astronomical. But they only had enough money. They made 1,000 copies in the wood grain with a label stuck on it, constructed in the basement of our house, right, and put together. And that came out. And from those humble roots, we now have this juggernaut of Dungeons and Dragons, just huge, vastly popular. And now it's from having 100 people in a room, you have tens of thousands who gather and millions who play and share. So I just think that's really fantastic, and I just wanted folks to remember or know about where the roots of the history were, where it came from. Where did our game come from?
It's really important that you know the history of the things that you are in love with. Because stuff like this, I know that we came out with a 40th anniversary edition of that.
Yes, we did.
Like a reprint. It's this beautiful red wood box. It's absolutely gorgeous. And that is you guys can't see it, but there's a pile of amazing down here that are all collector items. Like that right there, I'm starting to sweat over here because it's so amazing. Todd Kenrick from D&D Beyond went to Joe Manganiello's house to film him and his E. Gary Gygax Memorial Dungeon. So we're going to cut to some footage of Todd interviewing Joe in his home.
I had the chance to speak with one of D&D's biggest fans and to get a tour of his game room, which he calls the Gary Gygax Memorial Dungeon. We are in, what are we in right now? What is this place?
Welcome to the E. Gary Gygax Memorial Dungeon in Beverly Hills, in the basement of my house. And now I named it that years before ever meeting Luke Gygax. Because I used to play in a group with a Warner Brothers executive, a couple Upright Citizens Brigade comedians, and my brother. We've had this like home group going, and we played Tomb of Horrors actually, which is apropos to this conversation. That was the first. We played a couple homebrew adventures, and then we all wanted to do Tomb of Horrors because we had never done it. And so my friends would come over and they walked into the foyer of my house upstairs, which is, big. And they looked up and went, "Man, this is just the way Gary would have wanted it." And I said, "Come on, man, come downstairs." And I showed him this dungeon room, which was a wine cellar. It was the only room in the house that we didn't renovate when we moved in. I sold my bachelor pad. I had a house in the hills that I sold. My wife got rid of her condo, and when we got married, we moved in together here. And she wanted to turn this into like a Pilates dance room with bars on the side, and was getting ready to do that with the wood panel floors. And I started playing Dungeons and Dragons again after a 25 year hiatus. And I said, "No, you can't do that yet, please. I'll build you a dance studio somewhere else. I will destroy the backyard and build you a dance studio. I have to keep this room. It's perfect." I started playing Dungeons and Dragons again, and I need this room. I have to keep this room intact. And as you can see, over the course of the next few years, the dragon heads and beholders and mind flayer plaques started moving in. The minis started moving in, and a library and Dwarven Forge and flight combat tiers and gifts from people. "Hey man, I saw this Hand of Vecna at a store. I want to mail it to you. Where can I mail it to you? Hey, I painted you this big undead red dragon. Where can I send that?" So this thing just got built out and became my man cave, if you will.
What impact has Gary Gygax had on you and your childhood? And beyond that, even pop culture in general.
Man, there are several ways that Gary Gygax impacted me on a personal level because I am a professional artist and storyteller. And long before drama school was available, long before screenwriting classes were available for a kid, I had an outlet for all of those talents. So, growing up, I practiced and did my, forget 10,000 hours. I mean, we're talking 20, 30,000 hours of just writing stories, creating characters, writing backstories for the characters, connecting them. I was working my brain in a way to understand like episodic storytelling, like over time, how to introduce a character, introduce a little event that would later then blossom 8 episodes down the line. How to sneak plot lines and threads and story arcs and character arcs, and I was working all that out before I even knew that was a job, and so for me this was this weird, bizarre game, this way of working that part of my imagination as a kid, and somehow it found me, I found it, whatever it was, but my brain was perfectly compatible with tabletop role playing, which is attributed to Gary, because prior to Dungeons and Dragons it was war games. You were in control of an army and you were trying to beat this other person's army, or you were reenacting battles from history. And what Gary said was, okay, well, here's the big army, but what would it be like to be one of the soldiers? And what would it be like to build that character, that soldier character out? And then furthermore, I don't want to do battle reenactments. I want to have monsters and a fantasy setting. And these were really revolutionary thoughts. So for me, a kid that grew up with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, to be able to find a way to create an avatar for myself and insert that in a game with my friends who were playing versions of themselves, avatars of themselves, it was revolutionary. Because when I run into those kids nowadays as adults, we don't say, hey, remember that one time we played that game where we went into that dungeon and then our characters fought the boss? No, we say, hey, remember that time we were in that jungle and we went across that rope bridge and he fell off, but you grabbed him, and we made it across, and then we fought those trolls and we found that ancient temple and we went inside and we beat that manticore? Like, we say we did it. In our minds, we were actually doing it, which is what I do as a performing artist every day. And Gary figured out a way to create an infinite sandbox to play in. My wife surprised me on my birthday this past year. Since I started playing D&D again, I play as Archon the Cruel, who's an Oathbreaker paladin of Tiamat. And she knew I was like obsessed with these Dragonlance books, and she knew that I was flying around the world to go hang out with the authors of these Dragonlance books that I loved. And so, unbeknownst to me, she got in touch with one of the great Dragonlance artists, also one of the great D&D or AD&D module artists, Jeff Easley, unbeknownst to me. And one day I came home and she said, oh, do you want your birthday present early? I said, yeah. I said, well, do you want to give it to me early? And we were going on vacation. She said, yeah, you should open it now. You can enjoy it. I said, all right. So I opened this package, and inside of it was an original Jeff Easley oil painting of my character, Archon the Cruel, in Dragonlance, like book cover style. And it just blew my mind. It's crazy to, it's crazy that my entire generation of D&D and tabletop role-playing game players are playing again. that we're all playing again. As an entire generation, we're all playing again. There are games all over Los Angeles. We're all playing because we all moved to LA with the hopes of working in entertainment as an extension of these games that we played as kids, whether consciously or subconsciously. And to think that Jeff was still around and still an unbelievable painter, and that I would have a character that was, painted by him, it just blows my mind.
Thank you, Joe, for being on D&D Beyond. I'm Todd Kenrick, your host. Thank you for watching.
Hello again. Thank you for watching Founders and Legends Day here on twitch.tv/DND. Thank you, Todd, who's in the background, for doing that. That was awesome. Joe has a super sweet pad, and his memorial dungeon is really awesome. We're going to come back to the conversation. Speaking of collectibles and really cool things, Luke brought some minis.
I did. I just felt the table looked empty without some minis on it. So these are all custom sculpts for GaryCon. Throughout the years, I've been very blessed with some people helping me out. Nick Genovese helped sculpt a bunch of these, and then John Hobson did probably my favorite one, which was from last year, and it's super awesome. It's a I guess it would be a planetar or a solar would be what we'd want to refer to that is, with the wings and the flaming sword. Obviously a very good creature battling a lich. And the planetar character sort of looks like my dad did in the 70s with the hair and the beard and that sort of stuff.
Totally looks
So
like
yeah, so I kind of decided that was thematically that was Gary, my father, his memory living on and defeating death through GaryCon, and all of you guys playing D&D and remembering the roots. And then there's this neat ogre magi that's beaten up an adventurer, and that's from the Blighted Lands 2, the Tower of Akbaba. I do some writing, but I pretty much have just kept it to GaryCon. I haven't distributed it widely because my motivation for writing was more my dad wanted me to do it, and I only did a few things before he passed away.
You can't tell me what to do.
Yeah, well, it just, I had other things going on, and it was hard. And honestly, my dad was Gary Gygax, like, oh man, do I want to write? What if it sucks? Mike, it might not, right? So there's a little bit of that, but City of Gaxmore, Lost City of Gaxmore was really so much fun, and I got to cooperate with my dad and do that, and that was loads of fun. But that was like in 2000. But I realized, hey, GaryCon, you know what? My dad would have wanted me to do that, so I'm going to carry that tradition on. So I just write some modules there for a Dungeons & Dragons tournament that we do. So that's from the Tower of Akbaba. Then this one is from Plan B, the Fire Giant, the main bad guy in there, Molkovich. And then, of course, we just recreated the Paladin in Hell with a Demogorgon fighting. Yeah, it's cool. Skip Williams actually painted that, put that and painted together for me. So that was really, really neat. So that's one of the side bennies of having great friends who can paint, because I'm terrible, I can't paint. But yeah, so there's just so much fun. I get to do all these fun things at GaryCon. But I realized I was working so hard at GaryCon, I didn't get a chance to play. So today I'm going to play in all 3 games. So I get to play some D&D finally, not be working all the time.
Yeah.
Nice. You're going to make up for lost time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You work so hard to give everyone else a good time.
Mike, you're so quiet over there. How long have you been playing Dungeons & Dragons?
So I started playing back in 1981. So my brother had there was the basic set that came out in 1978.
Yeah.
Which I think the genesis of that was basically J. Eric Holmes, who was a professor of neurology
He was,
at USC.
Yeah. Interesting enough, I called my mom this morning to talk to her because I was like, hey mom, I'm doing this thing, a little nervous. She said, you're going to do great. But she said, you should mention J. Eric Holmes, and he was a neurologist at, I think, UCLA, or if I remember, at USC. And she said, yeah, the reason they did that is because the original 3 booklets were they were hard to read through. You had to refer back and forth. There's a lot of references back and forth. And so he sort of volunteered to clean that up, and that became basic D&D, so it was a little bit more orderly.
And that's where I started.
Yeah.
But what I always thought was really interesting, because I would have been like 6, right, was reading through, there was the intro was pulled from the original set. So it talked about the Castles and Crusades Society, and it talked about Blackmore and stuff. So I always had the sense of the game's history. and that it wasn't just a game like, say, Monopoly, where it's like, oh, here's the game. It was written in someone's voice.
Yeah.
There was like, J.R. Holmes has like in the intro, I think it's an intro he wrote with his name and like the date and things like that. And so that's kind of what put me down on the path of thinking of game design as something you could do, because it was this idea that someone made this game. And because it required, D&D requires you to create. And that's what I remember. I was telling this story last night. I had a copy of Keeping the Borderlands, but no map. So it didn't. The map gatefold. The modules used to come in like it was this little like the cover would not be attached, and that's where the map would be. So you could lay it out. And so when my brother gave me the set, it didn't have. Neither book had their covers. He was Boy Scout. They'd bring the D&D set camping, and so of course it gets a little destroyed. So I remember my parents were wallpapering one of the rooms in the house, and we'd have these big long scraps of wallpaper, and I just started drawing my first dungeon on that. I just started unrolling it like a scroll and adding more and more rooms. Like I'd read the room description and I'd draw it on the map and put in the stuff. Yeah, there we go. There's my map, because I didn't have a map. So that was kind of like my first game design was
That's
building.
awesome.
I remember doing that, and then I remember designing video games. I would do the same thing. I'd say, here's the first board, and I'd draw it, then I'd draw the next board and roll it out and draw each board successfully that you'd go through.
And now
So-
one thing led to another.
Yeah, and
and
here I
we
am.
are.
Yeah,
Well, that-
franchise.
Yeah, franchise. Ding.
I want like a different font, like above,
Can we get the flames for that? Is that
Yes.
franchise?
my intro to come out on stage.
It's really neat, though, that we're talking about the history, because the common thread is people who have, despite logic, have followed their passions and have done things that aren't along the normal path of how you should live your life. And it has created happiness, straight up happiness, and conflict and drama and just excitement in people's lives, where you don't have to go across the world and adventure, even though some of us do. You can have these wild adventures in your home, and one of the things that Rudy and I do is we do a lot of research on the effects of Dungeons and Dragons on people. Right, so he and I both have really severe PTSD, and so I've been playing since 1988, and having the trauma that happened then, and having D&D move with me through my life, it's really fascinating, because it's not something that you actively think about while you're playing D&D.
Yeah.
However, through my research, I've found that the therapy for PTSD is cooperative playing. They actually recommend like stage theater, where you can work with a group of people to accomplish a goal. And here we are, once, twice, 3 times a week if we're lucky, getting together, making all these new memories. What are other effects that you guys have seen with D&D in our world?
Well, it's interesting, because I read somewhere that someone kind of thought of video games as being a space where like it's safe to fail, like you're playing by yourself. If you're playing a single player game like Legend of Zelda, or Breath of the Wild, or wherever, you can afford to try things, and if they fail, you just go back to your save point, right? And so you think about that in life often, like if we're in school, you can't take your math test and decide, hey, I'm going to try a different way to solve this. Oh, now I got a D. Oops, right? Like, and I think that is part of games. It gives you the sense overall that you have space to fail. You can experiment. You can do trial and error. And I think Dungeons and Dragons, because it's so social, role-playing games in general, extend that to a social space, where rather than in a game I might play by myself and I have kind of, okay, no one's really watching me, I can kind of do what I want. In D&D, I think it takes that and extends it to something that's a bit more social, or I'm talking to people, I'm coordinating. I mean, I think back when I was running D&D when I was in 6th grade, I had to coordinate multiple schedules. Who's free on Tuesday?
Yeah.
I had to lead people, like, hey, this is where we're going to meet. We'll meet at the library at 3:00.
Yes.
And then this is the rules for the campaign. Like, it's management, right?
It's manager, designer, storyteller.
Right. And I'm in the military, so I look at this and I go, wow, what is Dungeons and Dragons teaching? And I had this conversation. I was in Indiana just a couple of days ago at an exercise, and one of the civilians working there was a retired Army officer. His name was Tim Densham, and he's now runs a little game company and stuff. But he was talking, he was like, I realized that I was kind of the quiet guy. I was smart, quiet, but when I got in the Army, I was a little bit more sort of. I realized I had a lot of skill sets that I had honed around the D&D table, and I was like, yeah, I recognize that too. It came to me a little bit later, but I didn't realize. But what are we doing? If you're dungeon mastering, you're coordinating several different people. You're trying to analyze where they're taking the story, right? Stay one step ahead of them. You're anticipating, right? You're improvising, you're adapting. That's what they teach you in the Army: adapt, improvise, overcome, right?
Yep.
So those are all leadership skills. Yes, absolutely. So because you don't know what the enemy's going to do, right? So you got to be able to react to stay alive.
Yeah.
So all those things are definitely leadership skills, and then of course all the tying stories together. Taking time to set aside time and make it happen, coordinate schedules. You said all those things are fantastic. So you're really getting those leadership skills. So I wonder, you look back prior to Dungeons and Dragons, who do we think of as being the in charge or kind of people leading society? Right? It's kind of the jock, the captain of the football team, whatever. Now I think we've seen for several different things, and maybe partially because maybe a lot of these guys who maybe were not as upfront before, didn't have those leadership skills sharpened. Since teenagers, they've been practicing leadership.
Yeah.
So they have a big advantage when they get into the workforce. They know they can lead that meeting. They can bring up these points. They're agile. They have mental agility. That's
Talking
another
in front
buzzword.
of people, which is the scariest thing still.
Yeah.
It is. But yeah, one of the things that makes me proud as a dungeon master is when everyone works together.
Yeah.
And it's hard at first, and everyone's trying to find their own footing for things. But when they all work together, it's like the best feeling. You're like, my children, you have done the thing. You have succeeded in ways you'll never understand. We don't have much more time in this conversation. So we thank you, folks at home who have asked us questions. We're going to zip, zang, zoom right through them. Okay, first question, and these are fast. We're playing it loose and fast. Well, not so loose because we're on a tight schedule. Okay, Luke, do your children participate in D&D like your father exposed you to the game?
Yes, my children play. Miriam, my oldest, she's 11. She loves to play, so she has a ranger. He's 3rd level, I think, now. The problem is I'm so busy doing stuff that it's hard to make that time. But we still get together and we'll shake dice, even if it's around just some really cool Dwarven Forge tiles and miniatures that I have, thanks to my buddy Mike Noah at Iron Wind Metals for casting all these miniatures, by the way.
Too?
Yeah, he did all of my
Mike.
miniatures. Yeah, Mike, he'll be in game 1 with us too, so I'm sure I'll thank him there. But yeah, no, they're all in it. My youngest one's only 5. She's not as much into it. And my 7-year-old is more of a princess, so I was like, what kind of character do you want to be? She's like, I want to be a dragon princess. I was like, okay, there you go.
I like that. That's awesome. Okay, Mike, ever see a Greyhawk support in 5e?
Oh, I'd love to. And actually, we just announced the Ravnica product, so the first D&D Magic crossover. So that's one setting being brought to D&D. And then we also announced the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, which was Keith Baker, the creator of Eberron, helped drive that. So we're definitely going to look at how that plays out, because the one of the great things of the Wayfinders and that approach is it lets us get a setting out there very quickly, but also in a way that's really connected to in this case, Keith, who's behind the setting, but a way maybe connect someone who is attached to a setting in a way that could be interesting. We'll see. I don't want to say anything or get put, think about, but it's definitely something we're thinking of, and I'd love to do something with Greyhawk. So,
the next question, and I should have expected this. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. The question is, where are my ears? I always wear elf ears, and I could only find one of them this morning. It is the saddest, but they're here in spirit. Everyone here, the question is to all of us, are any of us going to PAX West?
I am not sure.
Can you go with me? I'm going. I'm actually coming up for that week.
So the trick is that's during Labor Day weekend?
Is it? I don't know holidays.
Yeah, it's Labor Day. See, that's it. I know holidays because of my wife's work schedule and then my daughter's schedule because she's still with preschool and stuff. I know holidays. We'll see. I might. Definitely a bunch of people from the D&D team will be there, though, because it's in our backyard of Seattle. Yeah. You'll be there.
I do not have any plans to be there, but I could. You never know.
Maybe we'll see who can go, and we'll post it on the internet somewhere. Maybe just on my personal Twitter or not. I don't know. But it'll be in the ether very soon. Okay. Message to Luke. Mom and I are here listening, Luke. Whovian from birth.
Whovian. Yeah, that's my sister Cindy. Thanks. Okay.
She's a Whovian?
Yeah.
I love Doctor Who. Sorry, that came out really awkwardly. Okay, Luke, what, if anything, do you want people to know about your father that you think most people didn't realize?
Wow, that's a huge question. I could probably...
we can come back to that, too. Well, we have a whole day.
I would say my dad loved all kinds of games. He was pretty much a kid at heart. And some of the fun stories that I have from him are just stuff that you wouldn't expect. Even when we'd get the lawnmowers out, we had bought a house and there was an old lawnmower and the new lawnmower that we'd bought. So when we were going to mow the lawn, we pulled him out. We said, I wonder which one goes faster. So we'd race around the circular driveway. I mean, he was still a kid at heart. And I think he really thought of himself as just one of the guys, just a gamer. You know, someone said, oh, what does it feel like? You know, you're the inventor of role-playing games. He's like, no, I'm not. I said, ever since kids have been alive, you know, playing cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians or whatever it may be, they're role-playing and there's acting. He said, I just, you know, made this game and I'm just, you know, I'm a gamer. I got really lucky and I just want to play games and have fun. So that's one thing that just came to mind.
Nice. Okay, last question before we go. Stephane is preparing his game. His players, I believe, are in their seats. The question is, I'll be playing D&D at Gen Con for the first time in 30 years.
Wow.
What can I expect from the game now?
Oh, so I think what I hope you feel is the game feels very similar, and you know, that in terms of the relationship with the players, the dungeon master, that's still consistent. But I think the one thing you might find is just there's a lot more people playing. You know, there's going to be a lot. You might kind of be surprised by the variety of people who are sitting down. Just the game has grown so much. And I think the one thing I would say, the one thing that has changed definitely mechanically, I played AD&D last night, is you can take more risks at first level. You don't have to worry so much about losing your character. That's something we've learned. I was talking about video games earlier, right? We're like, oh, I can try this, and I die. I'll just go back to my save point. That's kind of part of modern gaming, is this idea of, unless you're playing, like, there are games that cater to that. But yes, you could probably afford to be a little more heroic at first level than maybe you could have back at 30 years ago.
Yeah. And if you haven't been to a gaming convention in 30 years, and this is you coming back into it, it has changed.
Yeah. It has changed.
There is a way more people playing of diverse backgrounds, a lot more women playing.
It's beautiful.
And it's not, you know what's really beautiful? It's become so part of our culture, it's not stigmatized anymore. Because just think about it.
We're cool now.
Yeah, it's like the cool kids, you know?
We were always
kids,
cool.
That's right.
Well,
you were D&D before D&D was cool.
That's funny you say that, because I was the school nerd and people would throw food at me and throw me in garbage cans. But I've come so far. It is one of the things that I feel has changed is, especially through the editions, I feel like in 5th edition, it's more about the table versus the actual literal translation of rules. And actually, you taught me that. The very first time we were on Stream of Annihilation, and I was sweating, and I think I started crying. I was like, I did it wrong, and I couldn't remember this. And you're like, did you have fun? As long as everyone's having fun, you know, you can maneuver the rules as long as they're consistent. And that is one of the things that I think is amazing. You can go to a convention and every table is special. Every table has a dungeon master who's going to run that table. Generally, you know, the rules are generally the same, but each game master has that flair that makes it their own. And each table, even if they run the same adventure, is going to have a different experience. Yes. So that is where we're going to end this round of interviews. If you guys haven't already, go to extra-life.org/team/D&D and donate. There's another website. It is
dd.wizards.com/extralife, and that's where you can find an overview of our events and some links to our individual pages and details on today's event and some of our future fundraising.
If you want some cool swag, I'm going to plug it.
Do it.
foundersandlegends.threadless.com. You can get your own coffee mug, t-shirts, throw pillows.
I didn't know there were coffee mugs.
Beach towels. You can get everything you need with the Founders and Legends dragon on it, or the cool Founders and Legends coat of arms. So two designs out there for you to choose from.
Next up, we have Stephane Portnoy. You may know, if you don't know him, you should. He is the founder of Dwarven Forge, pretty much the terrain that that I use because it's so cool, very intricate. He is running an AD&D game. I believe they're level 3. I didn't hear a no, so they're level 3. We have Elisa Teague, who is a longtime game designer and puzzle queen. We have Kelly Lynn D'Angelo, who is the dungeon master of Girl Scouts Glory here on twitch.tv/D&D. Kyle Newman, who's a filmmaker and the co-creator of Art and Arcana, a book that is, talk about collectors. It's the history of the art in D&D. We have this guy, Luke Gygax, and Mike No, who owns Iron Wind Metals. and minis. And yeah, so we're going to take a little moment to transition everything with another wonderful video from Todd Kenrick with our friends over at Wizards of the Coast.
The founders of D&D not only changed the game industry, they changed pop culture. I spoke with Mike Mearls and Jeremy Crawford about the impact of D&D.
In terms of game design, I mean, obviously, any game that uses levels owes a huge debt to essentially what I think of as the big breakthrough of Dungeons & Dragons. There are two. The first one being a game that really isn't a game. It's more a framework for a shared narrative. And this idea that you have a character who will change through success in the game, the scenario, the story, or whatever that's put in front of you. If you succeed, you gain something from that for your character that carries over to the next game. And I don't think a game had ever done that before.
Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and their group of friends who helped develop D&D originally, it really was, in many ways, one of those lightning strikes in popular culture, where this thing arose, this tabletop role-playing game, where there really was nothing like it before. Elements of it certainly existed before. All of us have played make-believe without needing rules to do so. And as far as we can tell, humans have played make-believe as long as the species has been around. So that D&D certainly didn't make up make-believe. Early D&D often used miniatures and had a grid. That came from wargaming, so D&D didn't invent that either.
I think it really comes from this fusion he had of being such a creative person, being such a storyteller, and then having a mind for war games at the time of, games that simulated historical battles or theoretical battles in the future. This is the 60s, the 70s, where the Cold War is in full swing. And so I think he was really the first person to bring those two things together, to say, rather than just rely on history as our guide point, right? Rather than going back and saying, well, what was the effectiveness of a T-72 tank versus different weapons that NATO might fire at it, and say, well, let's set aside history books and let's instead grab Fritz Leiber's short stories and say, that's our reference book. Now, what kind of reality would we build from that? And it's just amazing to think that's essentially what the mashup he did was take a wargaming approach to creating a fictional reality, a reality space that your game's going to take place in, and then what are the rules of this reality? Because when you think of games up to that point, until war games were invented, I think it was Charles Roberts who really kind of created the first modern war game. War games were just the tools for teaching military officers. Games people played were typically abstract, like chess, right? They weren't trying to capture a reality. It was an abstract version of reality. And so bringing those two things together, that's enormous. That's modern gaming.
But it was the fusion of those elements, along with the world building and the creation of various pantheons, all of that coming together, that alchemy, that's the special thing that Gary and Dave and the other founders of D&D did. It's like they mixed these elements up in a cauldron, and I'm not even sure they knew really how special this thing was when they first did it. Because of course, fairly early on when it became popular and started spreading like wildfire, well, then they certainly saw something special was happening. But I get the feeling that early on there was just, they were, like so many of us, experimenting with something that appealed to them. And then the experiment led from one thing to the next, and suddenly we have this game that we're playing over 40 years later.
I met Gary, I had one time I met him, beyond just seeing him at a game convention. And that was back in, I think it was 2003, the since closed Higgins Armory Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts. Hosted an event where Gary came in and gave a lecture on medieval weaponry. And I think it may even have been focused on pole arms, which if you're not familiar with the early days of D&D, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was infamous for the extensive catalog of all the different types of long, pointy weapons that that medieval Europeans used at one time or another. And so there was this lecture you could pay to go to. I, being cheap, didn't want to pay for the lecture, but there was a free book signing that took place afterward. And so I got to meet him there. And I think what happened was, if you were a big D&D fan, you paid for the lecture and you got like an entire day to hang out with Gary and ask him questions and talk about, games and medieval weapons. And so when we showed up for the book signing, there's nobody there for like the first 30 minutes. Because I think, like I said, if you really wanted to show up, if you're the type of person like me who would show up early to get there like just as it starts, you probably just went the whole hog and paid probably like whatever the nominal fee to go to the lecture. So my friends and I had a chance to just kind of chat with him for a while. And it was really cool. He was very, like, in a lot of ways, when I think of how I try to interact with gamers today, I try to think of that afternoon where he put up with us, he answered all our questions, he was very gracious, he signed all our products, and he really took the time to try to give us thoughtful answers to the questions we had. And we asked him a bunch of questions about why did it work this way in AD&D and stuff. So he was very patient with us.
I know from years ago when I met both Dave and Gary, even when they had moved on, they no longer were at TSR, they were no longer working officially on D&D. When I talked with both of them, which was a great honor to be able to do so years ago, it was clear that D&D still had a special place in their hearts. Even though they had moved on, they knew still this game was momentous. And again, that's something we take seriously all these years later, that this is a very special thing. It inspires other role-playing games to this day. It inspires computer games, board games, and so forth. That creative fire that occurred all those years ago, it's still blazing.
Thank you, Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford, for talking about the impact of D&D. I'm Todd Kendrick, your host. Thank you for watching.